Fireside Tattoo Network, and welcome to another episode of Fireside Technique. I called this episode like tattooing fur or getting furry details or something clever that I thought you might click on. But really, what this episode is about is putting in the time. It's really about spending more time on your tattoos than maybe you think you need to. Definitely more time than your client thinks you need to, and just learning to recognize the benefit of slowing down and being methodical and putting the work in. That's really the way that you learn to fix errors. Your eye becomes a little better trained each time. The longer that you look at something, you start to become a better problem solver. And that's really what this is all about. We're in this for a long time. Hopefully, you want to have some longevity in this business. You want to build a portfolio of really great work and not just mediocre work. And that's what this episode is about. So take a look. I hope you get something out of it. Hope you get some value out of it. And thanks. All right, guys, let's get started here. And let me start off by telling you what we're looking at. It's a little trippy with these things going in two different directions. On the left, we have the end of the first sitting where I just blocked in all of my straight blacks. And then on the right, we have the healed version of the second sitting, or the first color sitting. It's probably settled in a month or two or something like that. And you can see that they're very rough. They both look like kind of underpaintings. I should also mention that there were no liners used in the making of these first two sittings. And that's because I like my edges to be nice and soft, and I like to sneak up on them and get my crisp edges towards the end of the tattoo. So let's get started here. I start by laying a green right on top of the blacks. And yes, you can tint a black with another color, especially once it's settled in. It's not quite as black as it looks like it is, and you lay that green over the top of it and you get this really deep green, and it kind of blends out to those background or to the skin tone in the background. Also, I'm using green not just because foliage is generally green, but to complement the oranges and reds and all those warm tones in the tiger. You guys always seem to ask what needle configurations I'm using. So in this one, I'm using, I think, a 23 mag, bug pin mag. I use that a lot. I try to use the biggest needle configurations that I can get away with for the longest period of time. Just like when I paint, I try to come back to a big brush at the end and try to simplify my strokes. I try not to get too caught up in noodling. That's just a personal preference. If I have a really small needle configuration or a really small brush or a really fine pencil for that matter, I'll tend to dive into these minute details way too early on. And so large needle configurations and large brushes are my solution to a problem that I know that I have. If you don't have that issue, you can obviously use whatever configuration you like. I'm just trying to curb my own tendencies a little bit. You'll notice as we move through this tattoo that there are a lot of subtle temperature changes, a lot of subtle value changes, especially when we get into the details of the tiger. And I'm not using very many colors at all. Really, I'm using this green, an orange, a light yellow, a dark red, and black and white. I think that's it. So anytime you see a color start to mute out or anything like that, like if I have an orange and then I disappear and I come back with something that kind of leans a little more towards a muted version of that color, all I'm doing is mixing it with its complementary. I'm just moving, I'm mixing oranges with greens to get different variations of the oranges. And that works with, all complementaries if you mix them with, or all colors, if you mix them with their complementaries, they tend to cancel each other out and mute. So now I've switched to a round shader, and I'll use this for the majority of the tattoo because what I'm doing here is I'm building texture and I'm developing edges. I'm sneaking up on these edges. So I use the big needle configuration for all of the block in, for all of the black work, and then for the rough block in of the oranges and the tiger and all the black work in the background. I use a big configuration, and then I'll start to get smaller and smaller as I need to get into these tiny details. You can see up in that background now what I did with that green and how you pack that green over the black, and you can really get some nice kind of painterly effects, real blurry, soft focus stuff going on just by laying different values of a color over the top of blacks. So you notice that I'm working with kind of a medium muted orange here, and I'm right at the edges of where the skin tone meets the color. And what I'm doing is I'm trying to just diffuse that edge a little bit. I'm constantly paying attention to edges here at the end of the design.
or on this last sitting, I'm always thinking about how that edge turns, how it transitions. And I always try to remind myself that there really aren't any truly sharp edges. In tattooing and traditional tattooing, sometimes there are, we use bold lines, but when we're trying to pull off painterly or even realistic effects, we really want to try to keep ourselves from bringing everything into sharp focus, because then you get into this like hyper sharp edge thing and it doesn't look believable at all and your eye doesn't know where to go. So I try to use edges to lead the viewer's eye as best I can. Now, as I work up into the eye here, I really want to focus in that area. So I'm changing the temperature a little bit. You can see that that's getting a little bit kind of purpley against that orange. I want it to fall into shadow, and I also want it to get a little bit darker so that I kind of define the edge of the nose and then kind of set the eye back in the socket. And then later you'll see that I kind of push the eye back out whenever I add the highlights towards the end. So I'm constantly thinking, anytime that I'm dipping in my ink caps, am I looking for something that is darker or lighter than the area that I'm working on? And am I looking for something that is warmer or cooler? Or as I often think about it, am I thinking of something that's more red or more blue or more green? Like what direction am I trying to tint it? And then that will determine kind of how I mix my color. I'm really sorry about the glare on this tiger the entire time. It kind of makes it hard to see what I'm doing, and obviously I couldn't see that. I just had a static camera kind of set up, and I didn't realize that I was getting this glare, but I think you'll still get some value out of this, or I hope you will. Now, I do take the time to wipe a lot at this phase. I step back. I'm looking at a reference photo of an actual tiger. If I didn't mention that, I've got my Cintiq set up beside me there, and I'm looking at the photo, and sometimes I'll zoom in on the photo, and sometimes I'll zoom back out. But all I'm doing is measuring relationships. I'm looking at shapes. I'm not thinking at all about a tiger's nose or about a tiger's eye or anything like that. I'm just trying to look at the shape that I'm making and compare it to surrounding shapes. So in size or in scale, what does this shape look like? Where does it end? If I were to draw a parallel line straight across the face, what does it hit? If I were starting from the center and it were a clock, what direction, what time would it be pointing at? I think about that a lot. So, if as the curvature of that nose comes down, is it pointing towards 5 o'clock? Is it pointing towards 6 o'clock? I'm trying to think of it in angles that way, trying to find a way to relate it to something that is measurable to me. You can see that I'm still working with that round shader, and I haven't gone back to a bigger configuration yet. And, if there's one thing I can say about pulling off realistic or painterly effects in tattoos, is that you have to slow down and you have to be really, really patient. And I know sometimes it's tough when your clients are maybe on a fixed budget, or maybe you work in a shop that taking your time isn't really seen as a positive. But if you want to pull off these effects, there's just no way to shortcut it. You really have to stop, think, look, measure. You're constantly thinking about relationships, and there's no way to think about that quickly. It's just something that you have to take your time on and just be slow and methodical. Now, notice the way that I'm moving my hand as I get away from the face, as I get up on the forehead, and then you'll notice it even more as I get up into the back of the tiger. And that's that I tend to loosen up my mark making. I'm moving a little faster. I'm not being quite as slow and methodical. And that's because I really want to focus the attention to the face of the tiger. So the closer that I get to the face, the tighter my motions are and the more rendered it really becomes. And then the further away that I get from the face, the more that I kind of loosen up my mark making and I get a little more painterly or brushy with it. There are a lot of painters that are great at that. If you think about someone like Chuck Close, who painted these giant, heads, giant portraits, and how he would really just render like the nose and the mouth And then as it moves out from the nose and the mouth, it gets softer and more blurry and more out of focus. And it's a really cool effect, and it just mimics what your eyes already do. You know, you have to focus on something. You can't see everything at once. And so my goal in a tattoo like this is to give you the thing to focus on. I'm trying to lead your eye and let you know where I want you to look. So here's a good example right here. I'm kind of being loose with these marks. I had kind of blocked in this kind of yellowish orange, and now I'm laying a burnt orange on top of it with this big round shader, and now I'm coming in with a yellow. So I'm just basically what I've done is I've laid my mid-tone in first, like my what do you want to call it? My local color, my local value is laid in there first, and now I'm coming back and I'm hitting my darks and my lights on top of that mid-tone. Now that's something that really works if you're able to let a tattoo heal down and then come back into it. If you have to do this all at once, you probably wouldn't approach it this way. If you look at guys like really good realistic tattooers like Steve Butcher or Nico Hurtado, they do a lot of these things in a single pass, and they have a completely different technique, and obviously it's really, really good. They're much better at realism than I am, but this is just my personal approach. It's just the way that I handle it. Now, as I'm up here on this kind of ridge of his back, I do slow down a little bit there. I did decide I wanted to catch kind of a strong highlight right up there on that ridge. Just I kind of like staggered the focal points a little bit. So the head being the biggest focal point, and then I let it get a little soft as you move up his back. And then as that kind of shoulder blade pops up, I thought that was a pretty interesting area. So I really wanted to kind of push that and have it pop forward from that background as well. I also think that shoulder blade pushing forward from the background helps the rest of his body moving back in the distance to fall back, if that makes any sense. So I'm really kind of defining that shoulder blade so that as you move down his back and towards his tail, by leaving that stuff a little softer and a little more painterly, it helps it look like it moves into the distance because it has less detail. You know, the further in the distance that you go, the less detail you can actually see. All right, and now I'm coming back and I'm hitting my blacks again. I'd already scrubbed these blacks in with with a mag, and now I'm coming back with this round shader, and I'm trying to catch a few of the edges and trying to just kind of give a hint of where the hair starts to separate, the orange hair from the black stripes. And I'm also filling these areas of his head in a little blacker because I want them to push forward. So I'm constantly thinking about pushing and pulling. You know, this darker and sharper edged black in the stripe that I'm working on now will read as closer and more in focus than the black stripes as they move up and across his back. And I hear a lot about, or people ask a lot about working dark to light, and I typically do work dark to light. You know, when this video first started, you could see that I'd put in all of my blacks first, and then I came in and laid in a first pass of my color, and now I'm refining. I do, when I get to this stage, tend to go back and forth. I just don't plan well enough to get all of my blacks in, or all of my darks in first. I'll scrub in some lights and some mids, and then I realize, I really need that edge to be a little sharper. And I've never had a problem with it. You know, as a young tattooer coming up, I was always told that I couldn't come back with blacks over my color, that it would stain the color and all that. But I've never really had that happen. As long as the skin isn't really beat up and you're using ointment and, you're kind of wiping away from the fresh areas of light color, I wouldn't just wipe that black straight into my fresh yellow. But I've never really had an issue with it. As long as you're careful, I think you can work back and forth from darks to lights. So I've switched from that bigger round shader to a round liner, and this is probably like a 7 or 8 round liner, a little tighter. And I'm really starting to refine these areas up closer to the eyes. And just trying to build little textures. I don't want it to read as like these clean stripes. I want it to read like there's variation within the black. I think a lot of times we lay black in and we just think of it like, well, there's the black, and then it's just flat and it is what it is. But really, there's a lot of information in the dark areas, and if you're willing to take the time and find variation in shadow areas, create those textures in the shadow areas. It makes a huge difference, especially in something like this where you're trying to get these kind of like textures of hair. If you can imagine, if I just laid all of the texture in with the oranges and yellows and whites and then left my blacks like these flat dark shapes, they would read almost separate from the rest of the tiger. You know, it would really take away from that effect that we're trying to get of the hair moving through or the fur moving through the entire tiger and through the stripes. So I'm coming back now with a little bit of straight yellow. One thing that I've just learned over time is whenever I am working, like I lay a mid-tone in and I let it heal, and then I come back with my darks and lights and I build textures like this, you have to allow for how it's going to heal. So if I feel like I want there to be, 2 steps in value from that mid-orange to my deeper orange, or 2 steps back in value from my mid-orange to my yellow, my light orange, I really want to exaggerate it on the front end. If I'm looking for 2 values of separation, I should go 3 or 4 values of separation, because once it heals, the thing to remember is that we're looking through the skin at that point at a healed image, right? So it's like the skin is like a tinted piece of glass. So you have to push those values and that contrast a little harder than you think you should, just to allow for looking through that tinted window at the image. You still want it to read as dynamic as it can, and you want to get those you want those furry areas to have enough pop where you can recognize them from a few feet away. So for that reason, I tend to push my lights a little lighter and my darks a little darker, and it might look a little exaggerated on the front end, but when it heals, it really settles in nicely for the most part. And here's an area that I have to be kind of careful, because I don't want, excuse me, I don't want that the kind of fur on the side of his head to be too sharp against the green background. And the reason being is, as we move along, the whiskers in the foreground and the eyes are really my focal point. So if I let that kind of tuft of fur on the side of his head have really, really sharp, crisp edges, then it wants to jump forward and compete with the whiskers in the front. And I haven't gotten to those yet in here, but you'll see as we move along that they're kind of the focal point of the whole image. Another thing that's really easy to get away from or to overlook as you start to delve into all these little textures and details is you can easily forget to think about the larger shapes. So every time I look up, I'm trying to refocus, and I'm trying to forget about that little tuft of hair that I'm working on, and I'm thinking, does this larger shape still work? If I, for example, that area I was just working on the side of the head, that whole block there, it kind of C-shaped block, is lighter than the area under the eye and the nose. Those are a deeper orange, and that's lighter. So the whole time I'm trying to think, does this thing still make sense as a whole? I don't want to build so many textures and get it so busy that I lose track of the overall goal of having, a dark area here, a light area here, a sharp focus area here, a blurry area here. I'm trying to think about those things the whole time, and to me, that's really the biggest challenge. It's fun and it's easy to get in there and start noodling away at stuff, and you start having fun and you forget, but you can't afford to forget. You build too many textures in this thing, or get too many things in too many areas in sharp focus, or start to get too many dark values in a light area, and then it starts to get confusing. All those things you just have to keep in mind. And the way that you learn is by learning to look at your reference and think about shapes and forget about the thing. Forget about what it is that you're looking at and think of it as a series of shapes and values. Now I'm coming back into the nose here, and I'm refining that a little bit further. I didn't want, since it is in the immediate foreground, I do want to make sure that I build some texture down the ridge of his nose, and that's what I'm doing now. I've just got a brown, an orangish brown that's a little darker than what's healed in right there, and I'm just trying to build a little bit of texture through there, like the light catching, and give the effect that there's some hair in that area and not just a flat shape. All right, now as I start to come in, I'm laying these straight whites in. This is where I really have to pay attention and be careful. I will go white crazy if I'm not careful. I'll just put it in everywhere because I think it looks so good. But you really have to be careful with this, and because it draws a lot of attention. So you want to make sure that you're using it sparingly and only where you really want to draw your focus. So obviously, the tiger has a white kind of a lot of highlights right there in that area under his nose, and that leads directly into these whiskers that we're about to get into in just a minute. Now, as we move up here on the back part of his head, you see how I'm not really building that white quite as thickly as I was down on the nose. I'm trying to be a little more kind of wispy with it. I'm not moving particularly slowly. I'm kind of moving through at a decent clip, just trying to introduce enough white to get some separation back there. But I feel like if I were to go through and really render each one of those little tufts of hair, that they would be really distracting. They would jump forward and compete with the eyes and the front whiskers. So I'm being careful just to kind of scrub that stuff in nice and lightly. Now you see the difference as I move to the whisker here, which is, to me, the focal point. These whiskers are the focal point of the piece. And I'm really slow and methodical. I'm scumbling these things in really slowly. And I've got some really saturated darks just behind them. And these are also my sharpest edges of the entire design. I mentioned earlier that I used a shader for most of the tattoo, and I just came to a liner here in the last sitting. And this is where that really pays off. You build these really sharp little edges right there in your main focal point, and everything else kind of gets into a soft focus a little bit, and those edges all look a little bit softer. All look a little bit softer. And I just really like that effect. And so we're getting here towards the end. I finish out these little guys. This is like the dessert time. And there you go. There is the finished on the right, and then I'm contrasting that with the healed version on the left, the healed version from before this last sitting. And you can see all those textures. It kind of has a painterly look. Some of it, some of it you can still even see the skin tone through, which I kind of like, in some circumstances. And if there's one thing that I really want to stress, it's that you should take your time, spend more time than you think you should. A lot of people would leave a tiger like I had it in that healed session and at the end of the first color session and call it finished. That was only maybe 3 more hours that I put into it. It's well worth it for your clients, well worth it for your portfolio. And, even if you have to donate a little time just to make better tattoos, I think it's well worth doing it, and it'll pay off in the long run because people will see the improvement in your portfolio, and they'll trust you a lot more, and they'll be willing to invest a little more money with you.
Hey, thanks so much for spending some time with us. I apologize that episode was a little bit longer than I like for them to go, but I did want to mention one more thing before we take off. We have just released a course, and it's called Fireside Foundations, and it deals with shape and value, which we talked about a lot in that episode, as they pertain to tattooing. So if you haven't had any formal art training and maybe some of those ideas are a little abstract to you, I think this course might actually help. We are not seasoned online educators or course builders, so I want to offer kind of a special deal to you guys for a limited time. If you buy the course in February or March of 2017, first off, you'll get $30 off of it. It's regularly $129, and we're marking it down to $99. But if you will go through the course and email us feedback, honest feedback on the course, we will provide all updated versions of the course, any future versions that come out for the life of the course, to you at no additional charge. You'll just get the updated course. So if you provide some feedback and we implement that feedback along with the feedback from other people that have bought the first version of the course, you guys will all get the second version, and you're free just to go through only the updated parts or take the entire course again. Right now it's 4 video modules that break down into simple exercises how light reveals form. We learn how to recognize shapes within everyday objects and then how to assemble those shapes and make some sense out of them. If you have any interest at all, click the link below and you can watch a little video on it and learn a little more. If not, that's cool too. Thank you guys. At the very least, go to tattooimprovement.com and sign up for our mailing list. You can keep up with new episodes and where we're going to be. We go to conventions and workshops, things like that. Thank you guys again. We really appreciate your support.